Michael, you were last here at the Oyster Stores after the release of One More for the Road album, which is it's got a very live feel to it.
Yes, it was, yep.
But that's quite different to its predecessor,
Correct.
Twist.
Yes.
How did the whole reimagining of The Wizard of Oz, or using that as a basis for an album, come about?
Our previous album to Twist was an album called Broken Land Bell, and some dance instructors at the University of Wichita, Kansas, where we had spent some time touring in the past, really enjoyed that work, and they wanted to somehow reimagine The Wizard of Oz to that album.
Yeah.
And it was a modern dance production with visuals and a very comprehensive, staging of our complete album. And we were like, this is strange because the album was a mishmash of very different styles and moods and feels, but they somehow made it work. And in the performing of this work, we were like, well, what if we really composed a body of work that was actually based on The Wizard of Oz, because we enjoyed the conceit, and we were a band that toured a lot in the Southeast and a lot in the Midwest, in Kansas, and I always liked to have a structure in my writing, and so we just went for it, and because we had to compose some new music for that piece, and so we already had it started, and it came about that way, very kind of organically.
You're a self-release band, and especially with something like Twist, did that give you, whether it's the luxury of time, that to be creative without having, say, an external record company breathing down your neck budget-wise and giving their input?
Yeah, we've never really had that, and I guess to our benefit and detriment. In our benefit, we certainly had no outside forces working on us. It was completely really shooting from the hip, and as the writing developed, the production value and the themes of the album started getting a little bit deeper and bigger. And we started working in a studio in Catskill, New York, with a fellow named Kenny Siegel, who I've worked with over the years, and he has a very beautiful studio with all kinds of analog instruments. And as we started writing, the production of it became much more involved, but in a way that felt very true and organic to the material.
Right.
And so it was an extraordinary experience as an artist, because it was very, very supportive atmosphere with everyone operating on their A-plus game.
The other side of the coin, with being a self-release band and through the pledge system having the responsibility of someone else's money to do it, you're juggling a creative process with the basic economics of recording. Is that a fine act?
Yes, and it's a very good question. Well said. It's we certainly didn't go over budget, and that was a good thing. I felt that we're used to living on modest means, and so when it came to recording, and certainly that budget that was from the generous donation of fans, we stayed within it, mostly because we'd never had that much money to kick around before, and it allowed us to kind of play a little bit with our audience's expectations. I think some to their extreme excitement, and some to like chagrin, perhaps, because they were they were used to a certain thing that we were doing, and we definitely went outside. We colored outside the box with that album. And my defense of it always has been, if you listen to the understory, like I approach it like a painting, and I'm an amateur student of painting, and I know that when you're painting, there's always some understory happening underneath, and you paint over it. But if you took an X-ray to it, you would see the bones and some of the ideas coming through. And in reference to working on that album, Twist, a lot of the understory is rural blues, early jazz, swing. It's there. If you listen to it, it just feels like we were pushing a little bit forward with our writing and the genre to make something, I think, fresh.
Well, in terms of the writing, then, did it concentrate the mind, knowing that you had to write a group of songs that had a common theme to it, or was that quite daunting? Were there pockets that you thought, we've got these, need to fill in the gaps, or was there a clear journey?
No, that's a good question too. There wasn't. It was never a clear linear journey, let's just say. And I don't think the album it has a certain flow and movement from start to finish, but it wasn't meant to be listened to. It wasn't written in the. It was quoting itself throughout, and it had a lot of movement that wasn't necessarily kind of following a chronological order of songs. So we in fact, the first song we wrote is the last song on the album. Knowing what it wasn't, for me, focused my mind. Like, I knew it couldn't be about these things. So within those parameters, we went deeper rather than wider, if that makes sense. And I think the depth it was in the layers that we were able to add from a sonic standpoint and from a lyric standpoint, and from the fact that we were really for the first time working as co-writers. I had a good bridge, Teddy had a good verse, blah blah blah. Hey, those work. If it stuck to the wall, we both liked the way it felt, then we went with it. So it had, in that respect, it moved very quickly, and we wrote a lot outside of the studio and in the studio in the moment. We just trusted our instincts as musicians.
One word that I've seen written about the band on a few occasions is the word vaudeville, with the sense that anything goes on stage. Would you say?
Yeah, I mean, that's our roots, and there's a performative aspect to our stage show, and the performance went a little bit more internal in the music with twist. And I think that's a nice way to bring it back around. It's not a vaudeville feeling album if you're talking about the heyday of vaudeville, or like the English plays back in the 20s and 30s where all the silent clowns came from when they crossed the Atlantic. The theatrics is in the music, and I would say that the twist is a theatrical album. I wrote it hoping that one day it could be staged. I really wanted something that could have a stage show or work as a soundtrack for something. It's very it has a very grand feel to it, in its scope. So.
Thinking of theatrics, one of your instruments on stage is the washboard, which is a very theatrical instrument. It does draw the eye to the stage, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It does. Yeah, and I came to the washboard after living in New Orleans when I was in my late teens, early 20s. I went there, like a lot of musicians, because I loved a lot of music. I knew that had come from there, especially Louis Armstrong and all those great jazz players from the 20s and 30s, and I saw a washboard player there who just knocked my socks off. And what I liked about him is that he was extremely musical, but he was also funny. And at that point was also working on the street as a harmonica player, and I was trying to bring some comedy into what I was doing. And so after I saw him, I immediately went out and got my own washboard, and I didn't even have anything on it yet until I started going to junk shops and started playing, and that was the impetus for that, and it stayed with me throughout my musical life.
Is it, in general, a self-taught instrument? Because I can't imagine you picking up the Burt Weedon play the guitar in a day type of equivalent book.
It is. I mean, I'm a self-taught musician pretty much exclusively. I think the washboard, it's so idiosyncratic that I would imagine that you'd have to kind of teach yourself. I mean, where I place things, it's muscle memory, and so there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's just, that sounds good, and there's a lot of washboard players out there, YouTube, and you could find a gazillion of them, and there's even washboard festivals, and there's some makes my board look like a very plain blank piece of slate compared to what I've seen out there. I use it less as like a drum kit and more as a like spice to the music we play.
Is there a basic style of playing though which you embellish? I mean, is there a natural style and fingering or whatever to
I would say yes when it comes to say Zydeco music, because Zydeco, and in fact my board is a Zydeco washboard. It's made by a Zydeco company, and so it was stainless steel, and it's meant to really be played much more percussively, like kind of like the drum in the band or with the drum in the band, and there is some of that style that I employ, but I would say I approach it more as like just someone who's playing like percussion, like maybe Latin percussion or something like that, or tabla. I mean, I don't, not that it's within those genres of music, but where it's kind of a little bit lighter and more delicate. But I'd say Zydeco is a washboard style that people played.
Well, one thing about that instrument as well, which might be an odd comparison, but something like the cello, which is an instrument that becomes part of your body.
Yeah.
What sense do you actually get when you actually play it, if you know what I mean? Because it is part of you.
It does feel like part of me, it is. It's very, I guess all instruments feel like the harmonica too is so attached to your breath and your voice that it feels very much part of me as well. The washboard's very different. It feels a little bit more, the harmonica feels a little bit more internal and emotional. The washboard doesn't feel. The washboard feels just strictly playful and like it's going to escape from my hands at any moment. Like it's almost has a life of its own. There's a bit of the clown and just intrinsically in it because it's always going to fall off. Things break. It's just so random, that I feel that it plays me as much as I play it.
Good training for a toddler in a couple of years' time.
I'm only afraid.
And just finally, we're approaching the end of 2014. What are the plans for 2015?
We're hoping to continue the writing. I think the touring will slow down a little bit this year as well because, again, I'm a family man now, and we're all starting other businesses, but we always manage to have enough gigs to keep us sharp, and we're hoping to continue writing with this company that we started writing with. So I think for me personally, continuing writing is the main goal for me. I've been working also with children's bands, and one in particular, and so writing a lot of children's music, which makes sense now that I'm a dad. And so that enables me to kind of still focus in and hone in on the craft of being a songwriter without having to trundle down the road. And then when we need to kind of exercise those performing chops, we get enough gigs to make those still part of who we are.
Well, I'm sure you'll have plenty more gigs here at Whitstable, because I know we'd like you back time and time again.
We had a blast last time.
Thanks very much for
my great
speaking
pleasure.
to me.
Yeah, thanks.
You.